Hi guys, so in this video we'll discuss about Circulus Arteriosus. So this Circulus Arteriosus, which is also known as circle of Willis, is actually a circle of different arteries, a network of arteries which supply the brain. Now on the right hand side of the screen there is an actual picture of this Circulus Arteriosus in the brain. It is a hexagonal circle. You can see the shape is pretty much hexagonal, which is situated at the base of the brain in the interpeduncular fossa. Now in this another diagram, you can see the position of it. You see, and the arteries, these arteries involved in its formation. Now we'll have a closer look at it. This diagram describes in detail the formation, all the arteries involved in the formation of circle of Willis. Anteriorly, it is anterior communicating artery. Anterolaterally, it is anterior cerebral artery. It is formed by the internal carotid artery. The posterolateral side of the circle of Willis, on the other hand, is formed by posterior communicating artery. Communicating artery is connecting the internal carotid artery to the posterior cerebral artery, which in turn forms the posterior side of the circle of Willis. Now let's discuss the functions. The function of circulus arteries involve equalizing. The functions served by this circulus arteriosus is equalizing the blood flow to a different part of the brain. Along with that, it provides a collateral circulation in the event of obstruction to one of its components. Again, have a look at this diagram. Now all these arteries involved in the formation of this circulus arteriosus gives off some branches over here. You can see these little branches. All these branches are studied by dividing in three major groups, that are cortical branches, central branches, and the choroidal branches. These branches given off by these arteries are divided in three categories. The cortical branches are those which run on the surface of the cerebrum and anastomose freely. That is, and when these arteries get blocked, they give rise to small infarcts. Infarct means damage or death of the brain tissue due to lack of blood supply. Now the central branches, on the other hand, penetrate deep into the white matter of the cerebrum and supply thalamus and the corpus striatum. These do not anastomose and give rise to very large infarcts when blocked. The choroidal arteries, as the name suggests, supplies the choroidal plexus of different ventricles. Now let's go in a little more detail. The cortical branches are formed by all three cerebral arteries, namely anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery, and posterior cerebral artery. That means the branches of all these arteries which run on the surface of the cerebrum are called cortical arteries. Central branches, on the other hand, are divided into 6 groups. One group called the Anteromedial Group, 2 groups are called the Anterolateral Group, 1 Posteromedial Group, and 2 groups posterolateral. The central branches, these are divided into 6 groups. 1 anteromedial, 2 anterolateral, 1 posteromedial, and 2 posterolateral. Let's discuss a little more about these groups. The first group, Anteromedial Group, which is pointed out by a pink arrow in this diagram. It is formed, these arteries are given off by anterior cerebral artery and anterior communicating artery. These supply the preoptic and supraoptic regions of the hypothalamus. The second group is the anterolateral group, which is also pointed out by a pink arrow right over here. The anterolateral group arises in two groups, one from each middle cerebral artery. You can see one on the left side and one other on the right hand side. These divides further in two sets, the medial striate and the lateral striate. The medial striate set ascends through the lentiform nucleus. It passes right through the lentiform nucleus while penetrating it and supplies the nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, along with chordate nucleus and internal capsule. While the lateral striate set of branches ascends lateral to the lentiform, it does not pass directly into the lentiform nucleus, rather it passes laterally to it and further turns medially and supplies it. Now, an interesting fact over here, one of the lateral striate branches is larger than the others and is called the Charcots Artery of cerebral hemorrhage. I'll show you in the diagram. This artery over here, you can see it is quite bigger than the other branches and is called the Charcots Artery of cerebral hemorrhage. It is a part of lateral striate set of the anterolateral group. The third is Posteromedial Group. It arises as one group from the posterior communicating artery and the posterior cerebral artery. These two arteries gives off branches to form the Posteromedial Group. This group supplies the tubular, infundibular and mammillary regions of the hypothalamus, subthalamus and the anterior and middle parts of the thalamus. Fourth group. This group also arises as two groups from the lateral part of each posterior cerebral artery. You see, this is the posterior cerebral artery and this group of branches is called the posterolateral group. It supplies the caudal part of the thalamus. After this, we'll discuss the choroidal branches. As the name suggests, these branches supply the choroidal plexus of different ventricles of brain. It includes anterior choroidal branch, which supplies the choroidal plexus of inferior horn of lateral ventricle. The posterior choroidal artery, on the other hand, supplies the choroidal plexus of the rest of the lateral ventricle. The last, posterior inferior cerebral artery, supplies the choroid of fourth ventricle of the brain. So this is all about the Circulus Arteriosus, guys. Alright guys, so that's all for the Circulus Arteriosus. I'll conclude our discussion by showing you an interesting picture. This is a picture of cerebral angiography. This red circle in this picture marks the circle of Willis. So guys, if you find this video interesting, consider subscribing our channel, hitting the like button and the bell icon. Adios amigos. Peace out.